People believe Europe represents the pinnacle of civilized governance. Parliamentary democracy,
universal healthcare,
high-speed rail connecting cultured capitals. And they are correct in terms of material comfort and social progress. Europe has achieved what many nations aspire to. But here is what the statistics reveal without emotion. In 2024, European NATO members collectively spent 1.9% of GDP on defense while relying on Article 5 guarantees underwritten by Washington. German industrial output remains 23% dependent on energy imports after Nord Stream's destruction forced a shift to liquefied natural gas price 3 to 4 times higher than what American factories pay. And 92% of Europe's cloud infrastructure operates on servers owned by 3 American corporations subject to extraterritorial legal jurisdiction. Rome did not fall because barbarians were stronger. Rome fell because the legions forgot how to march without foreign grain. The Ottomans did not collapse from external invasion. They collapsed when their economy became a subsidiary of European creditors. From our vantage point, the paradox is clear. Europe has constructed the world's most sophisticated welfare state on a foundation of strategic dependencies it did not design and cannot unilaterally modify. The enemy is not at the gates. The enemy is in the contract. Welcome to the Global Lens Network. From our vantage point, let's examine what critics call the defense spending crisis. They point to the 2014 NATO exercise where German soldiers simulated machine guns with broomsticks painted black. They cite the reality that only 8 NATO members met the 2% GDP defense spending threshold before 2022. They argue Europe has allowed its military capacity to atrophy. But we must look at the data without emotion. Yes, European defense spending declined from an average of 2.8% of GDP in 1990 to 1.47% in 2021. That represents a systematic reduction in hard power capability over 3 decades. That is a measurable transfer of strategic autonomy. However, here is the paradox. Even as Europe reduced defense expenditure, it simultaneously achieved the longest period of continental peace in recorded European history. Why? Because the strategic choice to rely on American security guarantees freed capital for alternative investments. Germany redirected defense budgets into renewable energy infrastructure. France maintained a nuclear deterrent but outsourced conventional force projection. The Nordic countries built world-leading education systems with funds that would otherwise maintain standing armies. Consider the mechanism. In 2023, Germany spent $66.8 billion on defense versus $486 billion on social programs. The United States spent $877 billion on defense alone. The delta represents a fundamental trade. Europe exchanged independent military capacity for social investment, subsidized by American strategic overhead. The F-35 fighter jet exemplifies this dynamic. European nations purchasing the F-35 are not acquiring a weapons platform. They are subscribing to a software ecosystem with over 8 million lines of code maintained exclusively by Lockheed Martin and the Pentagon. Without continuous authentication from servers in Arlington, Virginia, these aircraft cannot execute combat operations. This is not an alliance of equals sharing technology. This is a client-server relationship where the server controls activation rights. So the transformation will not be a dramatic military defeat. It will be like a muscle that atrophies from slow, silent, institutional, until the moment someone asks Europe to lift something heavy, and the capacity no longer exists. Let's look at what everyone focuses on, the energy crisis following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Critics say Europe made itself dangerously dependent on Russian natural gas through the Nord Stream pipeline system. They point to Germany importing 55% of its gas from Russia in 2021. They cite the vulnerability this created. But we must examine the numbers without political emotion. Yes, Russian pipeline gas flowed at $6 to $8 per million BTU compared to current LNG prices of $24 to $30 per million BTU in European markets. That represents a 3 to 4-fold cost increase. That is a structural shock to industrial competitiveness that cannot be absorbed without consequences. However, here is the paradox revealed by the industrial data. Even as Europe reduced Russian energy dependence from 40% to near zero between 2021 and 2024, American LNG exports to Europe increased from 22 billion cubic meters to 87 billion cubic meters. Europe did not achieve energy independence. Europe switched dependencies. Why does this matter? Because energy costs represent the foundation of industrial competitiveness. When BASF's chemical plants in Germany pay 4 times the natural gas price of competing facilities in Louisiana, the competitive delta is not marginal, it is existential. Between 2022 and 2024, Europe saw a 12% reduction in energy-intensive manufacturing capacity. These are not temporary adjustments. These are permanent relocations to jurisdictions with cheaper energy. Consider the specific example. In 2023, Volkswagen announced it would source 40% of battery production from North American facilities rather than expand European capacity, citing energy cost differentials as the primary factor. ArcelorMittal reduced European steel production by 15% while maintaining output in North America. The pattern is consistent across sectors. So the deindustrialization will not be a dramatic factory closure announcement. It will be like a coastline eroding grain by grain. Each quarterly earnings call, each capacity planning meeting, each capital allocation decision, until one day Europe wakes to discover its industrial base has migrated to cheaper energy jurisdictions. Let's examine what defenders of European sovereignty emphasize: the euro as the world's second reserve currency and GDPR as proof of regulatory autonomy. They point to the euro representing 20% of global currency reserves. They cite the European Central Bank's balance sheet of 7.7 trillion euros. They argue Europe possesses monetary sovereignty. But we must look at the architecture without patriotic bias. Yes, the euro functions as a major reserve currency. But the global financial system operates on dollar-denominated clearing mechanisms that Europe did not design and cannot modify unilaterally. When the U.S. Treasury imposed secondary sanctions on Iran in 2018, European companies like Total, Siemens, and Daimler withdrew from Iranian markets within 90 days. Not because they violated European law, but because disconnection from dollar clearing systems would be fatal to their global operations. However, here is the deeper paradox revealed by the transaction data. Even as Europe attempted to create alternative payment systems like Instex to facilitate Iran trade, zero meaningful transactions occurred. Why? Because 60% of global trade invoices are denominated in dollars, 88% of foreign exchange transactions involve dollars, and the SWIFT messaging system, though headquartered in Brussels, processes payment instructions that ultimately clear through New York banks. This creates what systems theorists call a network lock-in effect. The cost of exiting the dollar system exceeds the benefit of independence for any individual European actor. It is the same mechanism that keeps users on dominant social platforms. The value is not in the platform itself, but in the network of other users. Now consider the digital dimension. In 2024, European Union institutions stored 68% of their cloud data on infrastructure owned by Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, or Google Cloud. Under the U.S. Cloud Act of 2018, American law enforcement can compel these companies to provide data stored anywhere in the world, regardless of local sovereignty claims. The European response, GDPR, represents regulatory authority but not infrastructural control. Europe can fine American tech companies billions of euros for privacy violations. But Europe cannot prevent the underlying data collection because European citizens use American platforms that operate on American-designed protocols. Between 2020 and 2024, European Union fines on American tech companies totaled 14.7 billion euros. Yet market share remained stable. Google maintained 92% search dominance. Facebook properties captured 73% of social media usage, and AWS held 31% of European cloud infrastructure. Regulation without infrastructure is like having traffic laws but no roads. So the digital transformation will not be a dramatic severing of internet cables. It will be like a language dying out as everyone switches to the dominant tongue. Platform by platform, standard by standard, protocol by protocol, until one day Europe realizes its digital sovereignty exists only in regulatory theory, not operational reality. The tragedy is that Europe possesses the tools to address these dependencies. Unlike Russia with its commodity economy or China with its demographic collapse, Europe retains unique strategic advantages that could enable genuine autonomy. Consider the objective data. Europe produces 47% of the world's luxury goods, maintains universities that attract 1.8 million international students annually, and leads global pharmaceutical research with 32% of new drug approvals originating from European institutions. The European Union represents a $17 trillion economy with 450 million consumers, larger than any nation except the United States and China. Europe could build a sovereign cloud infrastructure. France's Ovih Cloud and Germany's Ionos already exist as viable alternatives to AWS. Europe could establish a euro-based payment clearing system independent of dollar architecture. The technology is not exotic. Europe could create a common defense procurement agency to achieve economies of scale rivaling American military production. But in a cruel twist of systemic irony, every solution requires the exact political integration that European populations are increasingly rejecting. Building a European army requires surrendering national military autonomy. Creating sovereign digital infrastructure requires massive public investment that would violate deficit rules enshrined in EU treaties. Establishing euro-based clearing systems requires European banks to accept reduced dollar access, a sacrifice no individual bank will make voluntarily. The very thing that could solve Europe's dependency trap, deeper political and fiscal integration, is the thing European voters are voting against in election after election. From Brexit to the rise of sovereignty-focused parties across France, Germany, Italy, and the Netherlands, the political trajectory moves away from the integration that strategic autonomy requires. Consider the historical parallel. The Articles of Confederation gave American states sovereignty while preventing collective action. The result was economic chaos and military weakness until the Constitution created a federal structure capable of strategic autonomy. Europe faces the same inflection point that America faced in 1787. The question is whether Europe will make the same choice. So how does this end? There are only two paths forward for Europe. Path 1. Strategic integration. Create a common European defense force with centralized command. Build sovereign digital infrastructure through public investment funded by mutualized debt. Establish euro-based financial architecture parallel to dollar systems. Accept the political costs, which include German taxpayers subsidizing Mediterranean defense spending, French voters surrendering nuclear autonomy to European command, and every nation accepting genuine fiscal federalism. The political cost, electoral punishment for any leader who proposes subordinating national sovereignty to Brussels. The timeline? 2 decades minimum to build institutions that took America a century to construct. The probability based on current polling? Less than 30%. Path 2. Manage dependency. Continue the existing arrangement while negotiating incrementally better terms. Accept that European prosperity is subsidized by American strategic overhead. Maintain the welfare state by outsourcing defense costs. Regulate American tech companies while using their platforms. Complain about dollar hegemony while conducting trade in dollars. The cost? Europe remains wealthy, educated, and comfortable, but fundamentally unable to act strategically without permission from Washington. Like the wealthy heir who maintains lifestyle through trust fund distributions but owns no assets directly. Prosperity without sovereignty. Comfort without autonomy. History shows that most societies choose path 2 until circumstances force path 1. Britain maintained its empire through indirect control until 2 world wars forced American hegemony. The Bretton Woods system persisted until Nixon closed the gold window. Arrangements based on systemic dependency remain stable until the day they are not. The question is not whether Europe is dependent. The dependency is measurable across defense, energy, finance, and digital infrastructure. The question is what happens when the terms of dependency change. When American strategic priorities shift toward Asia. When dollar clearing becomes conditional on political alignment. When the subscription model requires payment Europe is unwilling or unable to provide. Europe has built the world's most comfortable house. But someone else owns the land, controls the utilities, and holds the mortgage. This concludes archive entry number 003. The observation continues. Next, the semiconductor choke point, when Taiwan controls everything.